Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Line, the Way, and the War, where we discuss Jesus, His church, and the spiritual battle that surrounds us all. My name is Craig Allison.
My name is Brandon Bonner.
And we'll be your host. All right, so we are going to be starting a series of episodes. I'm going to count here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6... Looks like about 8 episodes over the course of the next 8 weeks that are going to be sensitive in nature. So I just wanted to throw that out there. We're going to be dealing with human sexuality, gender issues, LGBTQ plus ideologies. But before we begin discussing like the sexuality piece of that, I'm using sexuality as a very broad term. On that, as you'll see, I think it's important on this episode that we unpack identity, what that word actually means, because culture starts with the default position that says, "Who do you feel that you are?" We talked about that. I don't know if was that our second episode, maybe, where your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth. So we're in that culture, we're in that stage where you look at culture defining your identity as well, who do you feel you are? You feel you identify your identity as a cat, then who am I to challenge that? So we're set up already to be approaching this from a very concerning standpoint, and so we're going to unpack that a little bit. We're going to see what Scripture has to say about our identity, because Scripture starts with this: who did God create you to be? That's a fundamental question. So this episode is going to be about building a biblical foundation. So our episodes that are going to follow through 8 or 9, however many I said there, I don't want these podcasts that are in front of us to become political or to be reactionary or without compassion or like just surface level stuff. I don't want that. They don't need to be that. Instead, these episodes that are going to follow need to be truthful. They need to be compassionate, and most importantly, we're going to root all of the things that we talk about within Scripture, because I think we've gotten away from that, and we may not understand exactly how God has framed out our identity, and how as Christians we need to be looking at that.
Yeah, and I think this conversation is important, right? Because everyone's talking about identity right now, and just putting different definitions around it. How do you identify? What group do you identify with? What community do you identify with? And I think it's important to know that these conversations, they're not about our desires. They're not about sex, or they're not about gender or whatever it might be. It's about self, right? We're not trying to win arguments. We're trying to really look at and understand, what does Scripture teach us?
Right.
What are they experiencing, and how do we respond to these things like Christ would?
Yeah.
And that's a pretty difficult thing to do in this culture. And culture says that identity is discovered inwardly, but Scripture doesn't say that. It says that identity is driven and given by God. And so this episode, it's not meant to attack anyone. It's not meant to divide, but it is really meant to build a strong biblical foundation for a loving and truthful conversation.
Yeah, and I think you and I had talked about this series of episodes that we were going to get into, and you had some concerns. And I think as we begin to unpack this, I think we haven't obviously gotten into all of it, but I think our conversations are going to hopefully create, for those that are listening, a alternative way of thinking, discussing, and relating to people that are gender affirming, people that struggle with these issues. And I think that there's an opening here for Christians to be a incredibly influential and powerful influence on those individuals, whether, you're, and I'm saying this because I know quite a few Christians who think they know the biblical response. And when I say, show me in Scripture, let's root this in Scripture, show me how what your position on this matches the scriptural viewpoint, they find out that it doesn't. And so I believe that these conversations are going to be healthy. They need to happen because we are so inundated by that cultural perspective of it. And if that's all you hear all the time, I understand why it's easy, especially for Christians, to be misinformed about this topic. And not only misinformed, but if you are informed, the way that you approach it and how you deal with this, both, maybe it's something personal in your own family that you're dealing with, or it could be somebody that you know or the workplace or whatever, that you're going about it in a way that is not helpful but damaging. So I think as we enter into this conversation at the most fundamental level, we have to ask, what does it mean to be human? Who gets to define who we are? Is it God or is it ourself? Because every later conversation from this point forward about sexuality is going to rise or fall on what we believe about our human identity. And we're going to talk about, Imago Dei and some other key aspects there.
Yeah, and that's kind of the catch, right? There's two competing identity stories here.
Yes.
There's culture story, which identity is self-made, it's self-defined, self-expressed. Like you mentioned in a previous podcast, my feelings are my truth, and then there's the biblical story, right? Imago Dei, we're created in the image and likeness of God, and so identity is created by God. It's revealed by God. It's redeemed by God. And so, first discussion point here is, when did identity become something that we choose instead of something we receive?
Yeah, I think we have slowly been conditioned, and I've used this example before, like the frog. How do you boil a frog? You slowly turn it up, and there's a lot of nuances here, a lot of things go into play. I think part of it is our advancements in technology has definitely played a part in this, where our population from a very young age begins to get conditioned into thinking that it's perfectly natural and okay to, as they get older and they see the hypersexualized world and all of these alternative, non-biblical principles just constantly bombarding them, it truly shapes their worldview and their narrative, despite maybe what they're hearing at home, because what they hear at home is just a speck compared to what they're constantly exposed to. So I think that plays a huge part in why we have more and more people believing that who they are as what it means to be human, their identity is shaped by whatever they want to be, and not any external objective truth.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that, another thing to think about is community. Talked about this a lot in previous episodes, but we want to be a part of a community. And so I think we tie identity very heavily into community. And so if we can shape and choose our identity in a way that we feel like we belong and we want to belong into, then that's what we're going to do. And I think, that's what we all do. We shape our identity so that we can feel like we belong. And so, another thought is, as Christians for Christ Church, how do we make this an environment that everyone feels like they can belong?
And I don't think we've done a great job, because when outsiders look in to the church, talking about our last episode, or maybe it was the one before that, where we, what we put out there on social media, if we're fighting amongst ourselves and it's all divisive, who wants to be a part of that? Right. You want to be part of a like-minded community. And so that's the thing. When we talk about this idea of like gender dysphoria, not sure who you are, or identifying as something that is different than your biological body says, then you get into this mindset that, that community that identifies with this alternative reality is way more accepting they're way more loving, they're way more kind. But when I look over at the Christians who are telling me, you're a sicko, you're warped, you're whatever, of course they're going to go in the opposite direction.
Yep.
I mean, who wouldn't? And so, and I don't think that, when again, this is going to be rooted in scriptural principles. Jesus is not dealing with people who are warped or deluded or, going down a wrong path or in sin. He's not dealing with those people by shaming them. Right. So I think that is a key takeaway for us who are listening that maybe really struggle with understanding this whole topic. Yep. and how we need to deal with it. Mm-hmm. So kind of coming back to the point here is, thinking about our paradigm that we stand on is who has the authority to define our identity. Because if we can't agree on that, then the rest of this conversation doesn't really matter.
Yeah, well, I think it's definitely the creator of the universe. Yeah. He has the authority to define our identity, and he has. The issue is when we begin to think that we know better than he does, and we feel like we can identify, or we have the authority to define ourselves and define our identity, and we do it all the time. I mean, we do it, every single day where we try to, let pride overtake, and we feel like it should be done this way, and because we know best, and that's the danger that we set up, but ultimately God has that authority.
And our feelings tend to override logic. Mm-hmm. Like this is what we're talking about here is where feelings have become your authority instead of God. And in case you missed it, what I was just saying a minute ago is when we ask the question, why are the younger generations struggling so much with this? Or maybe it's not a struggle. Maybe it's just they're jumping in it with both feet. We need to understand that the reason why that is happening is to some extent because the Christian community has pushed them away in a way that is just completely unbiblical. And that's part of the stuff that we're going to be talking about over the next couple of weeks. Like, what does that actually look like? How do we need to approach that? I think that there's a lot of people that absolutely should not approach this. They need to know, what, I don't have the skill set or the mindset or the heart to deal with that specific issue because it's too much for me to wrap my brain around.
Yep.
And that's okay to say that. But if you're that person, you need to, again, on another episode, it's like you don't have to express every opinion. Mm-hmm. And so this is like I said, it's a very sensitive topic, and it's something that is part of our world right now. And as Christians, we need to deal with this.
Yep. Well, and it brings up the point of how do we love people well without losing conviction?
Right.
I think it goes back to we try to force conviction on people. I think, like, if we're expressing our belief and rooting that in Scripture and biblical ideals, we still try to force them to feel convicted. And that's not what Scripture teaches. And that's not Jesus' approach either. Jesus hung on the cross. We sing a song, he could have called 10,000 angels. He could have forced conviction really quick. Yeah. But he didn't. And it's the same for us. We're instructed and we're tasked, and our mission is to plant the seed. But our mission is not to force that seed to grow. And I think that's an important thing when we're handling any issue, and these issues included, that I think it's important to have conversations and discussions, but it's also very important to have relationships and empathy and understanding, and understand that it's not our job to force conviction.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that when I say we, I'm talking about Christians, that I think we understand, maybe not able or verbalizing it or whatever, that when we look at humanity, when we look at our human body, and I'm going to just go on a side spill here because it's going to be tied back into something based on what you said. So our body, or our bodies, are not mutually neutral or subordinate to our self-perception.
No idea.
Like it's like you look at your body and you're like, okay, well, this is a neutral body, and it's going to have to subordinate to my feelings. It's going to have to submit to whatever I think it should be, and whatever I think it should be could very well be something one week or 1 year and something completely different the next year because of culture, because of society, because of influence, because of all this stuff that I think Satan is throwing out there to get us confused and to warp us and to warp our thinking. And I need the Christian listeners to understand this. That is gender theory in a nutshell. If you don't know what gender theory is, look it up. But what I just said, that encapsulates what gender theory is that your feelings are authoritative to the point that they subordinate your natural biological design to whatever you want it to be. Okay? And here's the ironic piece of gender theory is that they say, well, that's because it's it's the most healthy thing for a person to be able to do that. And what's ironic in that is that it's not healthy. It is causing more damage and more destruction and more health decline than anything else. Right? I mean, it is truly a sad state of I don't know, and I'm not, again, to ground us in what we're thinking. I'm not pointing fingers at people who are pushing that ideology, because I think a lot of them truly believe that they are doing what's good and what's best. But again, they're being influenced, I think, by just a ubiquitous cascade of where we're at today as a culture and what is acceptable, what's normative, and all of that kind of stuff. And so I know I'm saying a lot of stuff here because it's all going to go back to where do we ground ourselves? And it is Imago Dei. We are made in the image of God. So what exactly does that mean? What does Imago Dei mean for you?
I mean, I think to your point, like you said, it doesn't matter what goes on in this fleshly world. I know, and I'm fully confident that I was created in the image of God, that I have identity in Him, and I know that He will never leave me. And I, as long as I continue to follow Him and be committed to being a Christian and carrying out that lifestyle, then I can have full assurance and confidence that I will always have a place where I can belong and have community. And something we need to express as Christians to the world.
Yeah. And I think too, if we're grounding ourselves in Imago Dei imagery, which is we are image bearers of God, that we are inherently made in His image by design, by purpose, then the sexuality piece of this, that becomes peripheral, really. Maybe not even peripheral. And so I think going forward with this conversation, and I'm going to keep kind of hammering on this, is that it's those types of the whole gender dysphoria, gender confusion, all of those are distraction issues to what's really being attacked right now. And we need to be aware that when Satan attacks the fundamental principle of creation, of created order, he's weaving chaos into a design by God that is for our benefit. And again, this is not a conversation just yet about sexuality, about gender, or any of that. It's a conversation about being image bearers of Christ. And if we don't start there, and if we don't fully understand what that means, then we're going to struggle with the rest of this conversation, because it's going to start on the wrong foot.
Yep.
So I'm just like throwing words out at this point because I'm not sure what's sticking to the wall, but I think that the questions that need to be asked then is, what exactly does that mean for us? Like, how do we approach this conversation with a full understanding, or what do we need to do to get to a full understanding of Imago Dei?
Well, I think it's important to revisit, where does the image first become broken? Where does identity first start to fracture, right? And we know it's in the fall, Genesis 3. The image of God, Imago Dei, it wasn't erased, but it was fractured. And what was it fractured by? Well, of course, disorder enters, desires, self-perception.
That's it, Brandon. That's it. Disorder. Okay, because God's design was ordered. Mm-hmm. It made sense. It was taking chaos and putting order to it. And so what Satan does is he tries to revert back to chaos.
Yep.
That's it.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's important for us, and not to steal your point you might make here, but that identity is remade. Right? We have the fall. We have years and years of God's people just in this constant repetitive pattern of God trying to reconcile, them falling away, experiencing failure. I mean, it's just a constant cycle.
Right.
And then we see Jesus comes into the picture, and he's the perfect sacrifice and the perfect example, and really gives us an opportunity to completely be remade, for our identity to be completely shaped by him in a way that never before was a possibility.
And so, when we look at that, we see, when I was in the business world, we had this phrase like value-added stuff. And like, if you were doing things, you could stay busy, you could be doing all of this work, but it wasn't adding any value to the end product or the end result that you were desiring. So, creating value was something that was an integral part of everything that we did. So we need to understand as Christians that every single human being, whether you agree with their political stance, whether you agree with their gender ideologies, or any of the stuff that you're like, I can't, whatever, that they are Imago Dei. They are image, just like you. They are created in the image of God, and that should bring us to our knees. That should bring every person to their knees and understand we're not looking at human flesh. We're looking at something so incredible. If we could peel away this shell and see actually who we are, what our eternal self looks like, we wouldn't be able to, literally, we would fall to our knees in awe at what it means to be made in God's image. And that's the piece, I think, that gets forgotten, where we don't look at people's intrinsic value of who they're made of God. We see the outside shell. We see the distortion. We see the chaos. We see the seeds that Satan is sowing. Not just in this topic, but I'm talking about anything in, let's do like the heterosexual, cisgender male, that person who has all the normative things that is considered normal. Okay, well, are you representing the image bearer when you enter into sexual relations outside your marriage? Mm-hmm. No, you're distorting. You're sowing chaos. You're sowing disorder. You're doing exactly what Satan is wanting you to do. So this encompasses a lot of different areas. But for this particular conversation, I think it's a needed perspective for Christians that fall onto the normative scale of things to look at this going forward with that type of graciousness and understanding.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that, maybe not, but I think that we, and speaking generally here as Christians, we stop loving people very quickly. Yeah. You don't agree with me, or you live a lifestyle that's contrary to what I believe or what Scripture teaches or whatever it might be. You're on the opposite side of the political spectrum. We might say we love that person, but in practice, we don't actually love that person. Right. To your point, if we could peel back the layers and see past, political affiliation, sexual orientation, whatever it might be, then that our approach as Christians, I think, would be completely different. And that's what we need to strive for and work towards as a community, is how can we treat folks? How can we engage in conversations and relationships with people that ensures that we're continually seeing that all of us, everyone on this planet was made in the image of God?
Yeah, and I think, too, when we get to that point where we're viewing it through that perspective, we begin to see that there's not as much of a difference as what we might see on the surface. That, no matter what our past is, no matter the trauma that we've been through, no matter what our temptations might be, or what a label is given to us, whether that's heterosexual, homosexual, transgender, gay, lesbian, whatever it is, that the struggles that you have are real. There's no doubt. I'm not trying to minimize any of that. And let me just say this. Let me just pause right here and say that I've counseled and talked to a lot of people with sexual identity struggles and confusion, and they've told me, the vast majority of them told me, they've said, Craig, if I could snap my fingers and be like the normal person, like be heterosexual, like I would do that in a heartbeat. So, I don't think anybody wakes up and decides, you know what, I want to enter into this lifestyle that I know is going to isolate me from my family, possibly my friends, my, church, all of that, and create really just an upheaval. I don't think any of them are like that. So I say that, within the Imago Dei framework that we're building out in this particular podcast, that the struggles that we have, the temptations that we have, the labels that we have are absolutely real, but it is not your identity. That's the key point. And that's where we're making a lot of mistakes. We are confusing that. We're thinking that is your identity, and it's not. It's not. We have to go back to this idea that we are all the same. We are all Imago Dei, made in God's image. Yep. All right. So I think we're about probably running out of time now. So I know this has been kind of one of those episodes, but I wanted to set it up because we're going to be getting into some things over the next several weeks that, it's going to be some hard discussions. But like I said earlier, I think there's a niche here. I think there's an opening way for Christians who have been wanting to know, how do we address, like you may have a friend or a family member who struggles with this, and it's like you don't know how to approach this. And so I hope you tune in to these other episodes, because you may hear some stuff that might be, hopefully will be, I pray that it'll be very useful for you. Brandon?
Yeah, and we want to make sure that we're rooted in this concept, image of God. And that's the foundation moving forward for these episodes.
Absolutely.
And we want to make sure that we're compassionate, that we're empathetic and understanding. We're not going to rewrite Scripture. Yeah. But we understand that this is a sensitive topic. It's a very divisive topic. And so we don't want to be cruel. We don't want to mock. We don't want to create divide and division. We are ultimately trying to just have a conversation that's full of truth and grace.
Right.
And so that's going to be our goal. And I hope that, and I pray that these episodes moving forward can be rooted in that we're wanting to be the best reflection of Christ that we can be. So we want to thank you for listening. Of course, if this episode challenged you, or you feel compelled to do so, please like, subscribe, check us out. We're on all the major platforms: YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast. We want to make sure that we plug our sponsors. We have, of course, Ministry League, Central Church of Christ, allowing us to use this awesome studio. And then I want to do another plug. We have another podcast called After Sunday, Digging Deeper. It's a 15-minute synopsis of Craig's sermons. So if you want to hear kind of the meat of the sermon and not fall asleep by doing it, it's a good podcast to listen to. And
hey, why don't they plug us? We plug them. How come they don't plug us?
They should plug us.
They should.
That's something you should talk to them about.
I will.
Yeah. You want to close us out?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, thanks for listening to another episode of The Lion, the Way, and the War, where we discuss Jesus, His church, the spiritual battle that surrounds us all. I don't know why I'm doing the intro. You threw me off guard. Anyway, thanks for listening. Have a blessed day. Be kind to one another. Remember, the Creator of the universe loved you so much that He gave His only Son up for you. Have a blessed day.